It was supposed to be a day of mourning, not one that would change my life forever. I stood beside my mother's casket, trying to stay composed, but the weight of the loss was too heavy. She had been my rock, my foundation. Losing her to a sudden illness was devastating, but I still had to carry on. The cemetery was quiet, save for the murmurs of mourners and the rustling of leaves in the wind. My mind drifted between memories of my mother, her warm hugs, and her unwavering support. I barely noticed the small group of people standing to the side, observing us with what seemed like more curiosity than sympathy. One woman, in particular, stood out. Dressed in a sharp, dark purple suit, she looked oddly out of place among the somber crowd. I recognized her immediately. Karen, the Homeowners Association, HOA, president of our neighborhood. She was known for causing trouble. Over the years, Karen had made a reputation for herself by trying to enforce ridiculous rules that no one cared about. Karen had always had a disdain for people like me, those who didn't fit the mold she tried to create in our quiet, suburban town. But I didn't think much of her presence at my mother's funeral. After all, people often came to funerals to pay their respects, whether they were enemies or friends. However, I didn't expect the next few minutes to unfold the way they did. I felt a cold chill run through me as I noticed Karen's gaze locked onto my daughter, who was sitting in a wheelchair nearby. My heart sank. What was she doing here? What was her game? Then, without any warning, I heard the sound of a gunshot. The world seemed to stop as everything went into slow motion. My eyes shifted towards Karen, and in her hand was a small handgun aimed straight at my daughter. The gunshot echoed through the cemetery, sending a shockwave of panic and confusion through the crowd. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My eyes locked on my daughter, still in her wheelchair. Blood spurted from her arm as she cried out in pain, her face pale from the shock. I rushed toward her without thinking, instinctively protecting her with my body, while my mind struggled to process what had just happened. Karen stood there, gun in hand, her face twisted in an expression of satisfaction. It was as if she had planned this moment, calculated every move, every second. The sound of my daughter's anguished scream was drowned out by the rapid beating of my heart. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Why? I choked out, my voice trembling. Why did you do this? But Karen didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me with a cold, emotionless expression and casually dropped the gun to her side, as though she had just taken care of some minor inconvenience. It was at that moment that I understood this wasn't an accident. This wasn't some misplaced anger. No, this was premeditated. She had shot my daughter at my mother's funeral, and there was something far darker behind her actions than I could have ever imagined. My mind raced as I tried to gather myself. My daughter needed help, immediate help. But my thoughts were clouded by a much bigger question. Why had Karen done this? But as I looked at her again, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a smug, almost triumphant expression on her face. The gunshot echoed through the cemetery, sending a shockwave of panic and confusion through the crowd. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My eyes locked on my daughter, still in her wheelchair. Blood spurted from her arm as she cried out in pain, her face pale from the shock. I rushed toward her without thinking, instinctively protecting her with my body, while my mind struggled to process what had just happened. Karen stood there, gun in hand, her face twisted in an expression of satisfaction. It was as if she had planned this moment, calculated every move, every second. The sound of my daughter's anguished scream was drowned out by the rapid beating of my heart. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Why? I choked out, my voice trembling. Why did you do this? But Karen didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me with a cold, emotionless expression and casually dropped the gun to her side, as though she had just taken care of some minor inconvenience. It was at that moment that I understood this wasn't an accident. This wasn't some misplaced anger. No, this was premeditated. She had shot my daughter at my mother's funeral, and there was something far darker behind her actions than I could have ever imagined. My mind raced as I tried to gather myself. My daughter needed help, immediate help. But my thoughts were clouded by a much bigger question. Why had Karen done this? But as I looked at her again, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a smug, almost triumphant expression on her face that I couldn't look away. The woman who had just shot my daughter stood there, unfazed by the chaos she had caused. My daughter, still gripping her arm, was in excruciating pain, but Karen made no move to help. She wasn't even fazed by the carnage she had created. It was almost as if she had done it before. As I knelt beside my daughter, trying to comfort her and assess the damage, my thoughts shifted. Karen's behavior wasn't that of a random criminal, it was as though she was expecting no repercussions. It was calculated, deliberate, and it left me with a sinking feeling in my gut. There was something more going on here. The police were on their way, but they wouldn't be able to get to us fast enough. The scene was chaotic, filled with shouts and cries. It was a funeral, for God's sake, and now it was a crime scene. I felt a rising anger, a sense of injustice, so profound I thought I might lose my grip. That's when it hit me. Karen had been far too calm. In fact, she didn't even try to escape. She stood there like she was waiting for something, maybe even for the law, to catch up with her. But I knew better. This wasn't her first act of aggression. Karen had been more than just a nuisance in our neighborhood. She was a power-hungry individual who had always tried to control every aspect of the community. From enforcing unreasonable HOA rules to harassing residents for trivial infractions, she had made enemies of everyone in the neighborhood, including me. But that was just the surface. There was more to Karen than anyone knew, and I intended to find out exactly what she had been planning and why my daughter was the target. As I waited for the paramedics to arrive, adrenaline coursed through my veins. My daughter, still in pain but conscious, was whispering to me, trying to reassure me despite the fear in her eyes. It was then that I realized something I had kept hidden for years. I had never shared my true identity with anyone in the neighborhood, including Karen. No one knew I was the deputy commissioner. No one knew I held a position of power within the city. But today, it seemed that Karen had known. She had shot my daughter at my mother's funeral for a reason. She knew exactly who I was. My heart sank as I pieced everything together. Karen had been playing a game all along, one that involved more than just petty HOA issues. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. Karen had targeted my daughter because of my position. She had orchestrated this whole event as part of a larger plan. But why? The investigation was slow, methodical. The police took Karen into custody, but I knew this wasn't just about an HOA dispute. It was personal. As I began digging into Karen's past, I uncovered unsettling connections to people in powerful positions, people who had ties to criminal organizations. The deeper I went, the more I realized that Karen's vendetta wasn't just about controlling a neighborhood. It was about something far more sinister. I found out that Karen had been working as an informant for a group of individuals who had long been involved in criminal enterprises. She had been using her position in the HOA as a cover, spying on neighbors, and reporting back to her handlers. But my family had never been part of her game. We had been innocent bystanders, caught in the crossfire of a dangerous game we never even knew we were playing. My role as deputy commissioner had made us targets, and my daughter had become a pawn in a larger scheme. It was time to go undercover. I knew the only way to bring Karen and her associates to justice was by playing their game. I couldn't rely on the police alone. They had no idea about the depth of this conspiracy. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues in the department, people who could help me gather intel without drawing attention. The investigation quickly revealed that Karen's actions had been a calculated move to force me into a corner. She wanted to leverage her knowledge of my identity as a way to pressure me into bending to her will. But I had no intention of playing by her rules. This wasn't just about saving my family anymore. It was about protecting the entire community from Karen's manipulative reach. The more I learned about Karen's criminal connections, the more I realized the stakes were much higher than I had initially thought. She wasn't acting alone. There were others pulling the strings, and I was now in their sights. As the investigation progressed, I found myself drawn deeper into a battle for power. Karen had underestimated me, and now she was facing a force far greater than she had ever imagined. I wasn't just going to protect my family, I was going to dismantle the criminal network she was a part of. But the road ahead was treacherous, and every move had to be calculated. After months of careful planning, the pieces finally fell into place. Karen and her criminal associates were arrested, and the full extent of their operations was revealed. My daughter recovered from her injuries, and while the scars of that day would never fully fade, the truth had come to light. Karen's plan had failed. She had underestimated not only my power, but my determination to protect my family. As deputy commissioner, I had access to resources that she couldn't have imagined, and now I was using them to bring her and her associates to justice. It was a long road to recovery, but as I stood beside my daughter, I knew that we had won. We had faced down a powerful enemy, and together, we had overcome it. The truth had prevailed, and in the end, justice had been served.